Ooh, welcome back to the Saturday Scholars College Football Podcast. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. That is Xan. That is Gonzo. I am Shoob. And today we are here to do SEC West win totals. Let's go. It is time to wrap up the Power 5, gentlemen. It has been a long ride. 7 more teams to go. This division, always year in and year out, one of the best in the sports. You guys ready to hit the SEC West?
Let's do it.
All right, cue the music.
When I looked at this being 8.5, I said to myself, no way and no how. That is an easy under. But then I opened my handy dandy notebook and I did a little bit of research. I did a little bit digging.
The Texas Longhorns, a team that perennially underachieves. Are you telling me they are going to go 10-2 or are they going to go 8-4?
Get the dang police out there, because it's going to be animal cruelty what they're going to put this Buffalo through this season. Thank God that certain things are legal in Colorado, because you're going to need a lot of that to watch this team.
All right, starting at the top, the Alabama Crimson Tide coming with a line of 10.5 wins. I will lead us off on the Tide. So Alabama, 11-2 last year. This is Nick Saban's 17th season at Alabama. It's been there for quite some time now. And man, last year was a bit of a disappointing year for sure. Alabama did not win the SEC West. They lost head-to-head to LSU last year. Did get a nice Sugar Bowl win over Kansas State, but I think Alabama fans had high hopes for last year, including me. I thought this Alabama team last year was going to be really good. So it was a bit of a disappointing season last year, but we shall see if there is potential for a bounce back this year. Starting with the offense, let's take a look here at this roster. The Crimson Tide last year, they were 7th overall in offensive efficiency. It was, of course, a really good offense with Bryce Young and company, but Bryce Young has now departed, and they have a new offensive coordinator, Tommy Rees. Comes over from Notre Dame. He replaces Bill O'Brien, who left to go back to continue his friendship with Bill Belichick at the Patriots. So as far as the quarterback room, it's going to be a battle right now between Jalen Milroe, Tyler Buchner, and Ty Simpson. Now, there isn't really an indication as to who's going to win the quarterback job, but we can at least give a little bit of a breakdown of each of these players. Tyler Buchner coming over from Notre Dame. His numbers at Notre Dame are pretty subpar. I mean, let's be honest here. But he wanted to follow Tommy Rees, so he came down from South Bend. Jalen Milroe, pretty decent runner for sure, but passing numbers last year weren't that great. And then Ty Simpson. Ty Simpson, of course, former 5-star recruit, but he's only thrown 5 passes in his career, and this is only his 2nd season. He's a redshirt freshman, so huge big unknown there with Ty Simpson. There's a reason why Alabama turned to the portal to get Ty Buchner after the spring game. And that's because the quarterbacks did not look too great in the spring game. I don't know, guys. I'm trying to read the tea leaves here, but this quarterback room does not look very promising. But that's just me. Alabama fans, maybe you guys have a different opinion. Let's move over to the running backs. They lose Jahmyr Gibbs, who led the team in receptions last year, by the way. Jahmyr Gibbs, pretty big loss in terms of running and passing, but they do return Chase McClelland, who is very solid too. McClelland is a decent back. The wide receiver room, their top wide receivers all returned from last year. They returned Jermaine Burton, Jacoby Brooks, Kobe Prentice, and they also brought in their new starting tight end, CJ Dupree from Maryland. I think that's Dupree. I think that's how you say it. But anyway, the offensive line was above average last year in terms of line yards and sack rates. They have 67% line continuity going into this year, which is the 3rd highest in the SEC. And basically all that means is that 67% of the snaps taken last year by offensive linemen are guys that are projected to start this year. So having good line continuity is usually a good sign for positive improvement year over year. However, let's pump the brakes a little bit. Offensive tackle depth is definitely a concern, gentlemen. They have 2 true freshman backups behind J.C. Latham, who's going to be the left tackle. J.C. Latham is going to be really good, by the way. He's a projected first-round pick. And then Elijah Pritchett, who's over at right tackle. Pritchett, very limited experience himself. He is just a redshirt freshman, if I'm not mistaken. So very inexperienced there at right tackle. And as far as the interior, they have Seth McLaughlin, who graded as one of the best centers in all of the SEC. Darian Dalcourt graded really well at center last year, but he's going to be moved over to left guard going this year. So the interior definitely has some promise, but the tackle depth for sure is definitely a concern. We'll see how those guys do. And if there's injuries, that could be a problem for Alabama this year. But then again, offensive tackle depth is a concern for a lot of teams in college football. That just seems to be the premium position this offseason. And now let's move over to the defense. Defense last year, very solid, 5th overall in defensive efficiency. They had 6 players drafted off this defense. Alabama definitely got back to having very solid defenses. They were number 1 in the SEC last year in yards per play allowed. So it was a pretty good defense. The numbers back that up. There is a new coordinator. Just like on the offensive side of the ball, the defense has a new play caller. Kevin Steele comes over from Miami. He replaces Pete Golding, who left to go to Ole Miss. A lot of Alabama fans wanted Pete Golding out of there. Well, there you go. You got your wish. Now it's Kevin Steele who comes in. Defensive line last year, it was above average in all line metrics. They do lose Will Anderson and Byron Young. Big losses for sure. I do like Jaheim Otis at nose tackle. Otis graded really well, so he should be a solid player there. But overall, when you lose a guy like Will Anderson, Byron Young, both those guys drafted, I mean, that's going to be a little bit of a drop-off. Elite talent there. And then at the linebacker room, it's very solid with Deontay Lewis and Dallas Turner returning. Dallas Turner, projected first-round pick himself. They also brought in transfer Tresman Marshall over from UGA, who's projected to be a starter as well. So I like the linebacker room. And then the secondary, Kool-Aid McKinstry. Here's the good news. Kool-Aid McKinstry, graded as one of the best corners in the SEC last year. He's projected to be a first-round pick, could go in the top 10. And he's got one of the best names in all of college football as well. So I think that's going to lock him up as a top 10 pick just because of his name. The bad news, look at the rest of the cupboard here in the secondary. It's looking a little dry, in my opinion. They have a few new projected starters. You have safety Jalen Key, who came over from UAB. You have another true freshman, Caleb Downs, who's projected to be your other safety. Again, true freshman, projected safety. And then you have corner Trey Amos coming over from Louisiana Lafayette. So a couple G5 transfers projected to start here for Alabama. Let's keep in mind, guys, this safety room last year, they had Brian Branch and Jordan Battle. That was a pretty good safety room. They were both graded as the best safeties in all the SEC last year, both of them. The safety room, I think, is going to take a little bit of a hit. Now let's look over to the schedule here. Guys, this is a tough schedule. And I know we always say like Alabama and scheduling. I know Georgia seems to have taken over that moniker this year. This is a tough schedule. And usually when you see Alabama and Georgia schedules, it looks a little bit easier because they don't have to play themselves. But I look at this schedule. This is tough. You got to play Texas, who all of us are pretty high on this year. I see that game as a toss-up, even though it is at home. I mean, they barely beat Texas last year, even with Bryce Young. So I think that Alabama could be in store for an L there. And then they have to play Tennessee at home, who, of course, beat them last year. And then they draw LSU. I mean, those are some top teams. There are 3 teams that are probably going to finish as top 10, in my opinion, at the end of the year. Alabama draws them all. The good news is that they have all those teams at home. So the best games against the best teams, they all have them at home. So that's going in Alabama's favor. However, you also got some sneaky games like at Texas A&M where, you know, if Texas A&M lives up to their true potential, that could be a loss there. And then, of course, the end of the season at Auburn. I don't care which Auburn team it is. When the Iron Bulls played at Jordan Hare, Auburn just seems to play like a top 10 team. It just seems to be the way of the trade there. So this is a tough schedule, guys. And when I look at this team holistically here, massive step back at quarterback. I mean, let's be honest here. It's a pretty massive step back at quarterback. Offensive tackle depth is a concern for me. Secondary, I think, will take a step back. I mean, just look at the guys who are starting versus who left. Overall, I think the defense will still be great, but there's lots of turnover. I don't really see it being any better. I'll put it that way. And then the schedule. It's tough, guys. You know what my numbers project for Alabama? You guys want to guess what my numbers project for Alabama?
9.2.
9.4.
8.6.
Oh, wow.
Yikes. Now, I'm not that down on this team. I am not that down on this team. But 10.5 is the line. I'm under. I think there's legitimate concerns, gentlemen. Like, I don't think I've been able to say this about an Alabama team for like years, but quarterback, it seems like a massive issue. I don't know. I think 2 losses are in the card here for the Tide. I think even 3 are possible. So, what do you guys think?
Shoob, great points as always. Losing Bryce Young, number 1 overall pick, that's huge. And looking at the options now, not sold on Ty Buckner, and then Jalen Milroe is a good running threat, but can he throw it? And then, like you said, Ty Simpson has no experience. I will say in big picture that this team did ride a fantastic defense to a natty with Jake Coker at quarterback. So it's always possible. But I think of how the game's evolved, it's just instrumental to have an absolute stud for the most part if you want to win a national championship in college football, with those Georgia teams with Stetson Bennett maybe being that exception when literally everything else is in place. I share the same with the offensive line concerns, with the secondary. What's hard for me is I'm just used to Bama having studs everywhere. That it doesn't matter if there's no depth, because everybody's a 5-star and everybody's great, when that is not necessarily the case in this modern era of football. These 5-stars do go all around. They just don't all get hoarded by the Tide. So before I get into the schedule, I would just like to reiterate what you said about, yes, the secondary is a concern, and the secondary has always seemed to be a concern for Alabama teams. I think in Nick Saban's tenure, his most vulnerable aspect of his teams has been the secondary, which is a compliment when everybody else is doing phenomenal. But against these teams like a Tennessee, like an LSU, like a Texas with great quarterbacks, that can be very problematic if you can't cover people, can't stop the pass. I mean, we saw this in Tuscaloosa last year. So for me, it's 4 games on this schedule. It's the Texas schools and Tennessee and LSU. Will they go 4-0 in that stretch? I think probably not. Will they go 3-1? That's very possible. Will they go 2-2? That's very possible. My verdict is they will go 2-2. I'm on the under for Alabama. I think it's 10-2. I think this is a better SEC than we've seen in the past. I think Nick Saban is still the greatest coach of all time, but I just think that other teams are slowly closing that gap. It's not at all closed, but they're closing the gap. And I just cite for a legitimate reason, I cite Tommy Rees, prove it to me, and mega concerns with quarterback. Those would be my academic reasons for why I'm on this under.
I agree. Quarterback concerns, that's going to be the limiting factor in the offense. Maybe a step back on the offensive line as well. And then one of their projected starters is a 3-star transfer. When's the last time you could ever talk about that in their secondary? When was the last time you could ever talk about an Alabama team and say they've got a projected 3-star transfer or to start? So that just tells me about the quality. And then they have a true freshman projected to start as well, who, albeit highly rated and everything, as athletic as you are, you still make mistakes when you're young. So I see a lot of issues for the Tide, guys. A lot of learning to be done on behalf of some of the newer members that are going to have to step up. And yeah, the quarterback is the huge issue here. Middle Tennessee is a win. Texas, I'm going to say is an L, guys. I know it's at home. I think Texas beats them. I'm counting it as an L. If Alabama fans, yell at me throughout the screen all you want. You can rewind to last year. Quinn Ewers doesn't get hurt. Alabama loses to Texas. I think this year Alabama definitely loses to Texas. USF is a win. Ole Miss should be a win. Mississippi State should be a win. But again, when it comes to quarterback issues, guys, I mean, these could turn into probable games if the quarterback play is that bad. That's where I'm looking at this. At Texas A&M is very, very tricky. I'm with you guys. Texas A&M, Tennessee, LSU, Auburn are 5 games of significant concern for me. And basically, you have to go 4-1 in those 5 games, seal the over. I don't think that's going to happen. I think it's going to be a 3-2, maybe even a 2-3 in those 5. Give me the under on the Alabama Crimson Tide.
We're not crazy, are we? This is legitimately seems like this team could have multiple losses. Very likely it could be a multiple loss team. I think it's just because it's Alabama. It's really ruffling the feathers here. It's just we're not used to talking about a Nick Saban coach team like this, especially in the last 7 years or so with quarterback. But yeah, it might not be a great year in store for Alabama, but we shall see. If quarterback somehow hits, then hey, we're talking national championship contention and SEC contention for sure. But doesn't look too great, at least for now. Now it's time to move on. How about a little bit more positive things going around the program right now? LSU, they got the ball rolling. Our resident LSU law school alum, Gonzo, your Tigers sit with a line of 9.5 wins. You are the reigning SEC West champions. Can you repeat as SEC West champions for a second consecutive year? Take us away on the Tigers.
Well, I think that's very possible, Shoob. I mean, Brian Kelly, heck of a year one. You get double-digit wins. You win the SEC West. You beat Alabama in one of the best games in Death Valley. Need I say anymore? Looking at the quarterback room, I mean, you got Jaden Daniels and Garrett Nussmeier. Jaden threw for nearly 3,000 yards with 69% completions, 17 touchdowns, 3 picks, and then had 11 touchdowns on the ground with 885 rushing yards. He is a Heisman dark horse this year, and I think he's going to elevate his game even more, or at least the hope, when we say that in Baton Rouge, that he'll elevate it even more to what we saw at Arizona State when he was a freshman. And then, God forbid, if anything was to happen to him, you have Garrett Nussmeier, who showed flashes of greatness against Georgia, albeit in a blowout. But the fact that Brian Kelly was able to retain him in Baton Rouge is huge. Going into the running back room, I mean, I'm not even going to talk about really a starter per se. It's more committee with Frank Wilson as the running backs coach. You've got him coaching up guys like Josh Williams, the former walk-on, Noah Kane, Logan Diggs comes in from Notre Dame. If John Emery can get his grades right, Emery is a former 5-star. So they've got at least depth at running back room. Nobody who's out of this world great, but Josh Williams is the lead back in that room. The wide receiver room, I think, is one of the best in the conference, if not college football. Malik Neighbors had over 1,000 yards receiving, only 3 touchdowns, but he caught 72 passes. He's the number 1 wide receiver on this team. Complimenting him would be Brian Thomas Jr., who's a big basketball type body, about 6'5", so he can get up there, catch passes, especially in the red zone. Behind them, you got Chris Hilton, who's an absolute speedster. He was doing great before he got hurt last year. Kyron Lacey, who was a transfer in for last year from ULL. He can fill that slot role, along with NOLA native Aaron Anderson, who transfers back home from Alabama, as well as freshman guys to be really excited about: 5-star Shelton Sampson, Kyle Parker, Jalen Brown. So this is an absolutely loaded wide receiver room, a lot of weapons for either Jaden or Garrett to play with. Tight end room, Mason Taylor comes back. He didn't grade out too well, but given how Brian Kelly likes to use tight ends, Mason is going to figure in a pretty big role again this year. Of course, caught the game-winning 2-point conversion versus Alabama, and I'm excited to see his jump from freshman to sophomore year. Not to mention they brought in 3 freshmen through recruiting, as well as Connor Gilbreth from Butte College, JUCO transfer. He's more of a run block guy. On the offensive line, so I'll start with the negative. The depth does concern me. So these boys need to stay healthy, but the guys coming back is great. Will Campbell and Emory Jones did great as freshman tackles in the SEC, with Will Campbell grading out a little better, but you got them 2 on the outsides. Then Garrett Dellinger will compete with Mason Lunsford for that left guard spot. They'll kind of switch in at that role. And Lunsford coming in from Maryland, if I hadn't said that previously. Center is pretty much secured. Charles Turner graded out all right at center last year, and behind him is Marlon Martinez for depth purposes. Right guard's kind of where I have a concern, because Miles Frazier, who transferred in, he was below average and was kind of pretty decent at pass blocking, but I'm curious if freshman Lance Hurd could fill into that role and crack the starting O-line. So I like this O-line. I don't like the depth if anybody gets hurt. This defensive line is awesome. Makai Wingo and Mason Smith on the interior. Mason Smith got hurt that first game against FSU, the first drive, actually. So that was terrible to see, and I'm just excited to see him come back ready to go.
Celebrated too hard.
He said, yeah. No, I want to believe he's cooled it out since then, though I've heard stories that he he still likes to get excited if anything goes his way at some of those 7-on-7s, but I digress. Some transfers to keep in mind behind them. Jalen Lee from UF comes in to play a rotational role, as well as Jordan Jefferson from West Virginia. At D end, you got Savion Jones, who graded out well last year, with redshirt freshman Quincy Wiggins behind him and transfer pair Shan behind them. And then that jack position, that kind of hybrid role that Harold Perkins is playing, you bring Braden Swinson in from Oregon, who graded out well with pass rush and coverage. Deshaun Womack and Jackson Howard are both guys that the pundits think will be freshman impact guys. And I agree. Deshaun Womack's a 5-star coming in, so I'm very excited to see them get in the mix. Linebacker, Harold Perkins. He is him. Harold, some compare him to the likes of a honey badger Tyrann Mathieu. He's only a sophomore, but he was just an absolute beast last year. So they're really moving him more to like a pure linebacker role, and he'll be complemented by Omar Speights, who did fairly well at Oregon State, along with guys like Obi Agofu transferring in from Texas and Greg Penn third in that room as well. And then finally, the secondary, that's another area of this team where I have concern. You bring in Denver Harris, who's a former 5-star from A&M, who I know we kind of had some issues over there. So the theory is that he's kind of going to start getting it together, playing under Brian Kelly, as well as
who didn't have issues at A&M.
I thought Denver Harris. It was yeah. Sorry, yes, yeah. No, there's just a lot of cultural issues there, and clearly Brian Kelly saw that Denver, is buying into what BK's selling, and so competing with him would be Deuce Chestnut and maybe JV and Toviano, who's incoming freshman. On the other side, you got Zy Alexander from Southeastern here in Hammond, Louisiana. Him and J.K. Johnson will compete for that other cornerback role with Terrence Welsh in the mix. So I definitely have a bit of concerns on the outside. I like the safeties. Greg Brooks Sr., Major Burns both return. Sage Ryan, former 5-star, returns at nickel. And then Andre Sam transfers in to play a safety type role as well. He graded out well in his time at Marshall. So all in all, good pieces in the secondary, but there are depth concerns. To this schedule, I know I've rambled a lot about the personnel. I'm going to keep it simple. There are 2 toss-up games for me personally. Maybe it's a little bit of the purple and gold in me, so I do apologize if I've enraged people, but I think FSU to open the year and Bama and Tuscaloosa are really those 2 toss-up games for LSU. I think given the quarterback room, given a solid offensive line that needs to stay healthy, given Brian Kelly as a phenomenal coach, I think this is a 10-2 team. I think this is a team that can win the SEC West. I am over 9.5, and we're very excited down here in Baton Rouge.
Yeah, LSU certainly returns a quality team this year, no doubt. Good coaching staff, very, very, a lot of things to be very, very excited about if you're over there in Baton Rouge. Schedule, probables, I'd probably say FSU, Alabama, Texas A&M, especially if they get their act together. It is the last game of the season. If A&M's having a good year, A&M will have a lot to play for in that game. Same for LSU. So that's a game to keep your eye out for.
It's a revenge game for them. Remember they lost that last year to A&M.
And then I also don't think that they should sleep on Mizzou or Arkansas. They go at Mizzou, which could be a little bit tricky. And then Arkansas is a little bit of a quality team as well. So there's like 5 teams that I think could be a little closer than the rest of the games, or 5 games that could be a little bit closer. But to hit this over, they would just have to go 3-2 in those 5. And I think that's very well within reason for the LSU Tigers. So I'm going to go with the over as well in LSU.
All right. So we got 2 overs on LSU at 9.5. I will wrap us up here on the Tigers. So when I look at win totals, you guys know, if you guys listen to this, if you've listened to our breakdowns, you like to hear me say this a lot. When you have 2 good quarterback options, that is a sign of a high floor team, because if one of them gets hurt or doesn't pan out, you have another good option to go to. And LSU has that with Jaden Daniels and Garrett Nussmeier. So Gonzo, I know you were talking about the secondary. I really like the secondary additions that they brought in. Like I like Zy Alexander and Deuce Chestnut, who came over from Syracuse.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I like those guys a lot. I actually think the secondary will still be pretty solid. I know they did lose a few guys to the draft, and then of course the linebacker room with Harold Perkins and Omar Speights from Oregon State. That's a deadly linebacker room right there if they play to their ceiling. But anyhow, I think the defense overall, I think it has a chance to improve into maybe the at least retain in the top 20. And then I agree with you guys. I think FSU and Alabama are the only toss-ups. This is just not me playing numbers. It's just me just going with intuition here. For some reason, I just think that game last year where if FSU beat LSU, you know, it was a close game, could have gone either way. For some reason, I just think they're going to beat FSU this year. I just kind of have that hunch. Like, it's like FSU got the first one this time around. I think LSU gets them. That's just me going off a hunch there. But either way, I see that game as 50-50. And then, of course, at Alabama, which is going to be tough. But LSU has a quarterback advantage over Alabama. They have a quarterback advantage with Nussmeier over any of those guys that Alabama has. So, like, if your backup is better than Alabama's starters, that's a pretty good sign. If you're LSU, I think there's a chance they beat Alabama 2 years in a row. And then I don't see them going undefeated. I see 10 wins in the cards with upside for 11-1. Would not be surprised if this ends up being an 11-1 team. I think they're that good. My numbers project 10.6. And boys, that is a very solid over on LSU at 9.5. Guys, I got this line at 8.5 back in March.
Thank you for that.
FanDuel hung that one out there at 8.5. I was like, are you kidding me? I was like, I think 3 losses. You give me 3 losses of breathing room. That's an easy play right there. But anyhow, we're high on LSU. I think all of us probably agree LSU's the favorite to win the West, or should be the favorite to win the West. I think we'll put it that way. Well, it's time to head down to A&M. It's time to head out to College Station going west here. A&M, man, last year was they were no longer Texas 8-4. They were Texas 5-7. That was brutal. Jimbo Fisher's 6th season, and the seed is a little hot. I know there's a fat buyout that has to be paid to get him out of there, but man, this is Xan. Give Aggie fans a reason for hope, a reason for optimism that the ship can be turned around here with a line of 8.5 wins.
Perhaps there is room for optimism or reason for optimism. They do bring in Bobby Petrino, who's going to call plays. Oh, wait, maybe not. Maybe not. Whenever Jimbo gets asked if Bobby Petrino is going to call plays, he's kind of like, oh, I mean, you know, he's talented. Okay, so you dodged the question. So it makes me think that we might still see some antiquated Jimbo offense, which is a little bit concerning. However, if he lets Petrino make some play calls, there is some potential here. Let's dive into the offense. Haynes King leaves, not really much of a loss. They have Connor Weigman, who was absolutely outstanding in limited snaps, 900 yards, 8 touchdowns, no picks. Very high. I really like Connor Weigman a lot. I think he's got a very high ceiling. And then they've got a back with Max Johnson. So I think they're very deep at quarterback. They're in a good spot there. They do lose Devon Chain, who was 1,300 scrim yards in 10 games, by the way.
Go Fins, baby. Touchdowns. Go Fins.
In 10 games, he had 1,300 scrim yards. That's crazy.
He's going to be great. I can't wait.
He's a speedster, absolute beast. And then, but they still have Amari Daniels, Le'Veon Moss, and 5-star freshman coming in, Ruben Owens. So I think they've got a little bit of a tandem there they can use to supplement that loss. And then wide receivers, Evan Stewart, Anaya Smith, Moose Muhammad, Micah Teese, Noah Thomas. They've got good receivers, guys. They do lose Chris Marshall to Ole Miss, but ultimately I do like their receiving room. There's certainly a lot of potential there. Look at the offensive line. They've got a few decent guys in there, but their offensive line wasn't that good. Considering when we look at how A&M recruits, you would think that they would have more than an elite offensive line. I would say their O-line was average at best last year. Let's look at it here. Line yards, 71st, sack rate 40th. 40th is pretty good. 71st isn't. So I would say I expect them to be well within that range yet again, which is an average offensive line. When we consider that this team, bread and butter last year was their defensive efficiency at 30th, I think they have another good defense on their hands, although I do have some concerns with Texas A&M on their defensive line. They do have a net TARP rating of +8, generally means that there's going to be overall progression from this team from one year to the next. In their hybrid 4-2-5 defense, they have at the corner position, well, let's just say this. They lost a lot, but I think they brought in more quality than what they lost. And here's what I mean by that. You lose Jalen Jones. He's good in coverage. Sure. Good experience. Okay, that hurts. You lose Marcus Groves Killebrew. You can live with that. He goes to Louisville. You can live with that. You lose Denver Harris. What did he ever really do for you anyway? You never really you never really brought a new elevation to your production. He was in too much trouble with, team rules and all these other things. So he's gone. But you bring in Smoke Bowie from UGA, 4-star transfer. You bring in Josh DeBerry, 4-star transfer corner from Boston College. You bring in Sam McCall from Florida State, 4-star transfer. You bring in UNC's only good cornerback in Tony Grimes, who's projected to start. So you have 4 guys who all slate in there to provide really good depth and ability. So I actually think that's a net gain in the cornerback position relative to what they lost. So I think that's actually pretty good. They do lose Antonio Johnson to the NFL at the safety position, which definitely hurts. They return Damani Richardson, which is good to have returners, and then they return Jardin Gilbert as well, who between those two safeties, they had 700 snaps between each of them. So that's good. There's experience there. So I like that. I think the secondary will be a pretty solid unit, if not the strength of the Texas A&M defense. Their linebackers, they return Adrian Cooper, they return Chris Russell, and they bring in Geronte Davis from Jackson State. They've got some decent players there, but overall, it could be a better group. They didn't grade very well per PFF, about average. But when you're playing in the SEC, you need a better group than that for the Aggies. So I'd say they have an average at best linebacking group. Defensive line, as I alluded to, guys, that's my biggest concern with this team. Other than the play calling, other than the offensive play calling, my biggest concern is the defensive line. 82nd in line yards, 105th in pass down sack rate. It's bad, guys. And then they lose four highly rated guys in the portal. Anthony Lucas to USC, Marcus Burris to Indiana, Tunmis Adelaide to Michigan State. They do return Walter Nolan, who's a true sophomore. He was highly recruited, 5-star. We'll see if he can take that next step in his game. They return Fadil Diggs, who's a pretty decent pass rusher, and they return McKinley Jackson, who's just a pretty solid player. So they do have some good returning players, but there's a little bit of depth concerns for me beyond that. In addition to that, they just weren't that good last year. I'm expecting this unit to be more of the same. Maybe slight improvement if Walter Nolan just takes that next step. But I don't know, guys. That's the absolute weakness for this Texas A&M team. Teams that have really good offensive lines and really good running backs may be able to really take advantage of the Aggies here. Let's dive into their schedule. New Mexico, that's a win. That's an exhibition game. At Miami, I think that's a win. It's a probable, but I think it's a win. Miami doesn't have the best home field advantage in college sports, given that they play at the Hard Rock. I really think that A&M will pull that one out. Then they go University of Louisiana Monroe. That's a win, 3-0 start. Then you get to play Auburn at home. Auburn is a little bit better this year than years past, better coaching staff. But I have that as a probable, but I lean to a win because of the home field advantage. But all of this is pursuant to the offensive play calling, guys. There's a lot of things that could go wrong here. Arkansas, I have as a probable. I could definitely see them losing to Arkansas. I have Bama as a probable. I could see them beating Bama and also losing to Bama. I have Tennessee as a probable. Then a bye week, play South Carolina. They lost to South Carolina last year, but I think at home they can handle South Carolina this year. We all talked about we're not really very high in South Carolina this year. I think they win that one. You go at Ole Miss, which is a probable. I know they lost to Ole Miss last year. They could be in for another loss this year at Ole Miss. We will see. It just really depends. A&M is one of those teams that the talent is there, but the production is not. So it's really hard to predict what you're going to get with these guys. Mississippi State as a probable. They are at home. I favor them to win that. Abilene Christian is definitely a win. And then at LSU, they beat LSU by 15 last year, guys. Let's not forget that. They actually beat LSU by 15 points. It is in Death Valley, though, and it is in the final week of the season. There could be two different narratives here. LSU could be playing for a potential conference championship berth and chance to go to the college football playoff. Texas A&M might be playing for pride at that point, or they could be playing for maybe the same things if things go their way this season. It's really hard to pin Texas A&M. I go back to this. Concern, is Bobby Petrino giving full autonomy to call plays, or is Jimbo Fisher going to do more of the same? Is the defensive line going to be really, really bad? I think so. Overall, I think you take a step up at quarterback. You bring in a lot of good pieces on your offense. I think there is potential for a 9-3 season here for the Aggies, but because of the uncertainty with Jimbo Fisher's play calling and the defensive line, I got to go under, guys. And given their track record, I'm going Texas A&M, Texas 8-4. That's where I'm going this season.
Texas 8-4. Xan is under on 8.5 on the Aggies. Well, I actually think that the defensive line will just improve by default because they have a lot of experience returning. I have in my notes that I think the front six on defense has a chance to improve a lot, and the talent, of course, is there. But I agree with you, Xan. It's how much of the big question on offense is how much of a difference is Petrino actually going to make, or at least how much of a difference will Jimbo allow Petrino to make? We'll put it that way. But yeah, I think quarterback play, it's a step up over Haynes King. The metrics support that with either one of those guys, Weidman or Johnson. And then taking a look at the schedule here, a few of the tougher games are away. You got to go at Miami, at Tennessee, at Ole Miss, at LSU. Scheduling dynamics not favorable in that regard. They also draw Tennessee as the East game crossover, of course. So it doesn't help that you draw Tennessee in the East crossover. Not favorable. The good news, this team went 2-5 in one possession games last year. So for all the flack they've been getting, I mean, they were better than what their record showed last year. They played up to their competition. They also played down to their competition, seems to be the MO with Jimbo Fisher. My numbers project only 7.6 wins. It's kind of hard to peg down this team. I think 8-4 is actually the most likely outcome. I went through the schedule, and I feel like 8-4 is being a little bit optimistic, if I'm going to be honest. So I'm going to go lean under here at 8.5. But I will say this. If you do like the over on A&M, I would not touch the over. If you like A&M, I would rather place a flyer on their SEC title odds at plus 1,200. Because if you have this team with this roster talent, it's a tough schedule, of course. They're in the SEC West. I would rather take a flyer for them to win the SEC if everything clicks with that roster talent versus betting on them to win 9 games, because it's you never know. So that's just my 2 cents, but I am under at 8.5.
A&M is an interesting case study. Last year's season taught me that even if a team looks like absolute studs on paper, you really just never know. College football, and I cannot say this enough, is a weird sport. And actually, before I get into the schedule, Bobby Petrino, I do have concerns about that. I have a lot of concerns between him and Jimbo. I know Dion's got a camera crew for his season. I want a camera crew just to follow Jimbo and Petrino around, because I would just be very intrigued to see what those conversations are like, what those practices are like. And I hope for Connor Wegman's sake that he's not taking marching orders from 2 different generals, because that's just not fair to that kid who is legitimately good. Into the schedule, I almost said bona fide 3-0 start. Most likely a 3-0 start. Again, like Xan alluded to, Miami is just not an intimidating place to play until they take a Tulane approach and put a stadium near the campus or on campus. You're just not going to create that kind of environment. So I think they start 3-0. And then this is where we get into toss-ups for me. Auburn, I mean, we do not know what to expect from Auburn this year. I mean, Auburn could go from barely making a bowl game to not making a bowl game to finishing 3rd in the West for all we know. That's a toss-up. Arkansas is a toss-up, but I kind of lean loss. Historically, A&M has won the Southwest Classic, but in recent years, Arkansas A has won the game and also just played more competitive games. Alabama, I usually like to peg as a loss, but they did beat them there last time they played. So possible, not probable though, if you ask me. Tennessee, I think, is a bona fide loss. Bye week, probably beat South Carolina. Ole Miss is a toss-up. They're another one of those where it's hard to kind of peg them. You should beat Miss State. Actually, you should beat Miss State. I would think they would beat Mississippi State, especially at home. Beat Abilene Christian. And then I got them bona fide loss to LSU. My reasoning, they haven't beat LSU in Baton Rouge since 1994. And I know those can sometimes be archaic stats, but we do have recent history where A&M just cannot get over the hump at Baton Rouge. So I think because this game is in Baton Rouge, LSU is more likely to win it. So with that all being said, because of the uncertainty between Petrino and Jimbo, and because of a lot of toss-ups on this schedule. I am on the under. I think Texas 8-4 is more likely than 9-3.
All right. So we are three-way consensus on Texas 8-4 versus Texas 9-3. Well, hey, talent's there, boys. Talent's there. The question is, can it be put together? But yeah, I agree. I would rather see a camera crew at Texas A&M's facilities this year rather than Colorado. But that's just me. But we shall see, man. How far will that oil money go? How far will it go?
ATM equals 8-4.
Hey, I mean, you got the NIL Bowl at Miami. I like their chances in that one. And then after that, I mean, like I said, drawing Tennessee in that crossover is tough, but we shall see. But man, what a storyline though if A&M is able to put it together and make a run at the West this year. That would be something else. I don't know if we're ready for that. But anyways, let's move out of here. Let's head back east. Let's head back into the state of Mississippi. Ole Miss, the Rebels, coming with a line of 7.5. I'm going to take us away on the Rebs. So Ole Miss, they went 8-5 last year. Remember, Ole Miss started out 7-1. They were ranked pretty high. They were in the top 10, if I'm not mistaken. And then they kind of sputtered out at the end of the season. They finished 1-4, lost 4 of their last 5 games. But overall, a good season for Lane Kiffin, who's coming into his 4th year in Oxford. Offense last year, offense was definitely the driver of the bus for this team. They were 13th overall in offensive efficiency. This year, there's a bit of a quarterback battle between Jackson Dart, Walker Howard, who came over from LSU, and Spencer Sanders, who came over from Oklahoma State. So reading the tea leaves here, it appears that Jackson Dart has the slight edge at quarterback, which is really kind of funny to me because Lane Kiffin brought in both of those guys in the transfer portal just to probably go with Dart, who was the starter last year, which is kind of hilarious. But hey, I mean, Lane can do what Lane wants to do. But that's just what I would expect as of right now, but we shall see. We're recording this on July 23rd. And then the running back room, big piece returning, Quinshawn Judkins, really big piece returning, great running back, great player. And then the wide receiver room, they lose their top receiving leaders from last year in Heath and Mingo, but they do have 3 new projected transfer starters. You got Trey Harris, who comes from Louisiana Tech, Zachary Franklin, one of my favorite players from UTSA, and then their new tight end is Caden Prescorn. I don't know if I said his name right, who comes over from Memphis. They all graded really well. And I don't know about you guys, but looking at PFF and looking at every single one of Ole Miss's transfers that they have projected to start, I'm pretty sure Lane Kiffin uses PFF because like every single transfer that he got was graded like really high by PFF. So if you of you out there that doubt PFF, I think some of these coaching staffs use it because I'm like 95% sure Kiffin uses it. Anyways, offensive line, pretty average line metrics last year overall. They do have 68% line continuity, which is second in the SEC. So very probable progression this year from the offensive line compared to last year. None of their guys really graded well individually, but I think they will be better with lots of returning experience. And let's be honest here, the scheme with Kiffin's offense works well around it. So functionally, it'll be a good offensive line. And then the defense. Defense last year, fairly average, 52nd in defensive efficiency. They have a new defensive coordinator, Pete Golding, who comes over from Alabama. Defensive line last year, 87th in average line yards, pretty below average, but they were good at getting pressure on the quarterback on standard passing downs, which is pretty interesting. Very interesting splits there for the Rebels defensive line. Nose tackle, Josh Harris comes over from NC State. Of course, graded real well by PFF in just under 200 snaps last year. And then their defensive tackle, JJ Pegs. I don't even know how the hell you say his name. He returns, and then you got edge Jared Ivey, who grades really well. Linebacker room, pretty above average room, I'd say. Good depth and returning experience. Secondary, man, Kiffin went ham in the portal with the secondary. Lots of portal additions and added depth here. They have 2 new projected transfer starters. Zamari Walton, a corner who came over from Georgia Tech, and then John Saunders, who comes over from Miami of Ohio. Shocker, they both graded really well by PFF. Another transfer, Deshaun Gaddy, comes over from North Texas. He had elite grades last year, and but he's projected as a depth piece. And then they also have a handful of numerous decent options as safety. So this secondary, at least on paper, actually looks pretty solid. at least according to the grading services, but we shall see. Now let's take a look here at the schedule for Ole Miss. Week 2 at Tulane, boys. I do not have that chalked up as a win. I have that chalked up as a toss-up. My numbers are very high on Tulane. They actually have Tulane as a slight favorite in this game. Now, I don't know about that, but this is definitely like a toss-up game. Tulane is Michael Pratt. Pratt could start at a handful of SEC schools, a bunch of SEC schools, if I'm going to be honest. So it's at Tulane too. It's in NOLA. So that one is definitely, you got to have your ducks in a row to go down there and play Tulane, or else that could be an L. Georgia Tech should be a win at home. And then the rest of the SEC schedule here, Ole Miss got dealt a pretty tough hand. Their crossover rotational opponent is Georgia. So, yeah, that's not fun. And it's at Georgia, too, to add insult to injury. So you have Georgia as your crossover from the East, and then you got to go at Auburn, at Mississippi State, at Alabama. Those are pretty tough games right there. My numbers project 6.9 wins. Oh, this is tough because I look at this team. I think Ole Miss actually got better this year than it did last year, but that doesn't mean they're going to have the same record as they did last year because, guys, look at this schedule. Ole Miss improved from last year. The record will not show it. I'm under. I think most likely they go 7-5. Again, my numbers have 6.9. So another case of better team, but terrible schedule.
Shoob, this one was difficult for me. I tip my hat to the odds makers because I kept trying every angle, re-looking at the schedule. And after some thought, here's what I came up with. I want to go back to what you said. Kiffin absolutely uses PFF. It's absurd how you could take in this many transfers who all happen to grade pretty decently on the service. I do not think that's an accident at all. Kiffin's a very savvy guy, and I know he likes his analytics and his little quirks to an extent. So I can absolutely see him having a personnel guy to work PFF. So I'll start there. That I like a lot of these transfers they brought in. I share these same concerns with you with the schedule at Tulane. Whenever they agreed to this in like 2015, they were like, oh yeah, sweet. We'll go make a trip to New Orleans, and make a weekend out of it. But I didn't think Tulane was going to be coming off of the Rose Bowl. A tip of the cap to them and Willie Fritz as always, as I'm obligated to say for my errant judgment on the green wave. That aside, before the Bama game, 2-1 is very possible. You lose to Bama. I have them losing to LSU, but anytime LSU's got to go out there, that's dogfight. Arkansas is a toss-up. I'm with Xan, where I think Arkansas is a better team this year. On the bye week, this is going to hinge, again, where's Auburn this year? And you got to go on the road. Toss-up there. Vandy is probably a win, but not a cakewalk. A&M, toss-up. Lost to Georgia. UOM's a definite win. And then Miss State, that is a throw the record out game. It does not matter if Ole Miss is 11-0 and Miss State is 0-11. That is no gimme. That all being said, I like the talent that Lane's compiled. I like Lane as a coach. I do have some faith, even if it's a little bit, in Jackson Dart. I have faith in this defense. It's a lean over. I could easily see 7-5. Not super confident in it, but I'll give a little tip of the cap to Hottie Toddy and give them 8 wins for 2023.
There's no doubt. I agree that Ole Miss has gotten better than they were last year, and they brought in a lot of great accessory pieces. But, it comes down to the nature of the schedule. Just as Shoob mentioned, you can be a better team than you were last year. Just because you win less games than you did the year before does not mean you weren't a better team than the year before. It's all about who gets put in front of you. And, Tulane, I'm with you. Not a guaranteed win. Willie Fritz has got that program in the right direction. Then you go at Tulane. It's not even at home. It's at Tulane to make it even more probable. Georgia Tech. But let's say you get through Tulane. You're now 3-0. Then you got to play at Bama. Then you got to play LSU. And then you got to play Arkansas. That's a gauntlet right there of 3 games before the bye week. You get a bye week to prepare for Auburn. But I'm with Gonzo in that I don't know what really to expect from Auburn. I can see them coming out of the gates firing with under Hugh Freeze, and I can see them just being dreadful in year one under Hugh Freeze. We'll see what that is. That's at Auburn. That's a probable. They at least get a bye week to prepare for it. They get Vandy. I think they've got Vandy. A&M is a probable. Georgia's a loss. University of Louisiana Monroe is a W. Mississippi State, the Egg Bowl, the good old Egg Bowl, is at Mississippi State. That's going to be tough. I think this team definitely has the potential to win 8 games, but I think it's more likely than not, because of the quality of their schedule, that they go 7-5. So I'm going underneath.
All right, so we have me and Xan on the under Ole Miss at 7.5 wins, citing schedule as the main reason. Gonzo's on the over, but general consensus, we all think this team's going to be at least a little bit better than it was last year. But yeah, man, Georgia is when UGA is your East crossover, it's not great. And Tulane too on the road. That's tough. But with that being said, hey, if Jackson Dart stays consistent, this could be a top 10 offense. Now it's time to head to Auburn, the aforementioned Tigers with Hugh Freeze. Man, you guys are nailing it pretty well. I would agree with you. I think this is a team that has a very wide range of outcomes this year. And I don't know about you guys, but just on the national scale, I feel like I'm not hearing a lot about Auburn and Hugh Freeze this offseason, just in general. And I feel like that's a good sign if you're an Auburn fan.
Well, Auburn's PR team definitely took away Hugh Freeze's phone and social media account. So,
oh man, see, I wasn't even trying to lead into that joke, but props to you. I wasn't even trying to lead into that, but
we knew.
Hey, yeah, as long as they cut the cord to the landline, I think that's all Auburn needs to do. Just cut the cord to the landline and use your personal cell phone, Hugh Freeze. That's all you got to do. All right. Well, with that being said, Tigers come in with a line of just 7 wins even. Gonzo, take us away on Auburn.
The Auburn Tigers. After Hugh Freeze left Ole Miss the way he did, I didn't think there was a shot he'd be back in major coaching again, let alone the SEC. But here he is, and props to him for building his image and his career back up. He's got another shot. This is redemption. He's a very biblical man. He talks about forgiveness and faith and redemption. Well, here's your shot, Hugh. I want to highlight 2 guys on his coaching staff, and they're both his coordinators. Philip Montgomery leaving Tulsa to come coordinate the offense at Auburn, I think is very telling. I think that's a good hire. Tulsa, though not a powerhouse in the American, has been a good team in the conference, not a bottom dweller. So I like that. And I like Ron Roberts coming in from Baylor. I think he was more so fired from Baylor, but I think anybody who worked with Dave Aranda, and Roberts has been coaching for a while. I want to say he's been coaching for a while. I like that addition, and they're running the defense. And of course, you got Hugh, who's an offensive mind to begin with. Personnel time. So as we alluded to on our Big Ten pod, so here's where Peyton Thorne ended up. Him and Robbie Ashford will battle it out for quarterback QB1. Robbie's got the ability of his legs, and Peyton was, competent in Michigan State. I'm very intrigued to see how he'll do down south. Running back room, Jarquez Hunter, I know he dealt with some suspension issues. I don't know where that's at. I'm not going to comment on that, but if they can get him on the field, that is RB1 with transfer Brian, I'm going to say Battier from South Florida coming in. Basically a whole new wide receiver room. Nick Marner coming in from Cincy, Shane Hooks, Jack State, Caleb Burton from Ohio State, Jair Shorter, who probably grades maybe the best out of all these guys coming in. They're going to be very transfer heavy with the wide receiver room. And honestly, of the guys coming back, Javarius Johnson would probably be a name to know. Tight end, I like Rivaldo Fairweather from FIU. I mean, he graded out average, but he's a pass catcher, which I think will be very useful in a Hugh Freeze offense. Offensive line, you lost a lot. You lost Zurier and Council to the draft. That's your left tackle and center. Then Alec Jackson's done with football, and Brendan Coffey's done with football. I'd assume that graduated. As well as the backups for these guys, either graduated or are done. And so you bring in guys like Dylan Wade from Tulsa. He graded out well. Avery Jones was a steal. I feel bad. Illinois had him, and then Auburn was able to use whatever means they needed to convince him that Auburn, Alabama was a better home. And then another group of 5 edition, Gunnar Britton, graded out very well at Western Kentucky. I like those two on the outside. I like Avery Jones and I like Xavier Miller from Southwest Mississippi Community College. He was a JUCO All-Region All-American. So I like some of the pieces they brought in, but I'm kind of like a broken record with this. I do have depth concerns with this offensive line. Moving to the defensive line now, Justin Rogers was a great get from Kentucky. You're going to plug him in at nose tackle with returner Jason Jones behind him, who graded out very well. And of course, a few transfers in the mix there. At the jack position, I like everyone they got at jack. Kedrick Falk is a projected freshman impact guy, as well as guys like Eli McAllister and Jalen McLeod, who are both decent transfers. Linebacker room, you bring back a couple seniors with Wes Steiner, Cam Riley. You get a big loss with Demario Tolan. He had transferred in from LSU, but is no longer now with the team for whatever reasons. I hope everything's okay with that situation. To the secondary, I like the secondary a lot. I like who they got at corner. Nehemiah Pritchett graded out very well at PFF in pass rush and coverage. Across from him, DJ James graded out elite and was very good in coverage, as well as behind him, Jalen Simpson, they're saying could be an NFL guy. So I like them 3. And then at the safety positions, I like Donovan Kaufman. He graded out very well, as well as Keontae Scott at that nickel spot. And you could move him into free safety potentially if Zion Puckett doesn't work out, even though Keon Scott may be more of a cornerback. But, these guys can be very versatile. And now to the schedule. UMass is absolutely a win. At Cal, I have it as a toss-up. I mean, Cal's not great, but you still have to go out with a brand new team to the West Coast. So that's a toss-up, but probably a win. Samford's a dub. At A&M, that is one of those where I do not know. Does Auburn come in and light it up, or does A&M shut them down and light it up themselves? Georgia will be a loss. Bye week. At LSU, especially coming to Baton Rouge, will be a loss, but a competitive game, I still think. Ole Miss, toss-up. Mississippi State, toss-up. I lean to win, though. At Vandy, should be a win. At Arkansas, toss-up, I'd say. New Mexico State's a win. And then Bama, even if it's at Jordan-Hare, even though things get weird in the rivalry, I just think the pieces aren't there to beat Alabama. So in Hugh Freeze's first year, I'll give you this. I think a bowl game is very possible. I think 8 wins, unlikely. So bowl game, yes, but I'm under on this win total, and I'm very intrigued to see what a year 3 or year 4 Auburn's going to look like in the SEC landscape. But no doubt, they have a lot to be excited about with Hugh Freeze at the helm.
Let's look at the coordinators. I like Philip Montgomery. I think that's a good hire. One of the biggest concerns I have is losing Jeff Schmedding to Wazoo. 29th rated defense in terms of efficiency last year. Ron Roberts, I'm not sure he's that guy to come in and supplement that. I think that's a significant loss at the coordinator position. And the defense was their bread and butter last year. I expect the defense to potentially take a step back on that merit alone. I'm with you on a lot of things on here, and we'll kind of dive into that. They have a TARP rating of +9, guys. That usually spells pretty good things for your team. Offensive efficiency, 60th last year, absolutely dreadful. But I do think if Peyton Thorne wins this job, they'll actually be able to complete a forward pass and actually, improve upon that level a little bit. So if they're able to do that, then, I think that there is a new level that Auburn can take, perhaps not an elite level, but to a little bit more of an average offense. Now, I do like the potential there. Philip Montgomery, I'm a little biased, was a coach for me back in high school, worked his way up through Tulsa, and then became the OC at Auburn. So I like Philip Montgomery a lot.
That's phenomenal. Cool.
Yeah, I like Philip Montgomery a lot. He was our strength and conditioning coach. We always used to make jokes that he put steroids in the water. But he, so anyways, worked his way up to be the OC, and he's a good coach. He really is. Big concern, offensive line, guys. 81st line yards, 121st in sack rate. Holy crap. One of the worst 3 offensive lines in the SEC. I do expect the offensive line to be a little bit better this year, just by merit of what they have and what they've brought in and what they retain. just the whole revolving door. And it's kind of hard to be worse when you're that bad. So I expect some slight improvement in the offensive line. I like what they have at running back. I know they lost Tank, but I like what they have there. With you, wide receivers, bunch of just new guys coming in. We'll see how that works because it's a bunch of musical chairs here. Defense, 3-3-5 hybrid. Jeff Schmedding is gone. Love the secondary. With you, Gonzo. Love the secondary. That is going to be the absolute strength of this Auburn Tigers defense is their secondary. Linebackers, maybe there's some potential there. They did bring in some guys who graded out pretty decently. So there could be some potential at that level to be a pretty decent unit. My concern is the D-line. They lose Ike Leota, grades well at every level. They lose Derek Hall and Colby Wooten to the NFL. This already wasn't a good defensive line. You're losing 3 primary contributors there. You do bring in Mosiah Nasili Kite from Maryland, but he did not grade well on the defensive line, although he is a 4-star transfer, so maybe there's potential for him to improve. You bring in Justin Rogers from Kentucky, who's a decent player, but ultimately, I think this D-line is going to take a step back, and they already weren't very good, guys. So it's kind of tough for Auburn in that regard. So let's jump into the schedule. UMass is a win. Cal is a win. Stanford's a win. You're starting 3-0. At Texas A&M, that's a probable. I do have question marks about A&M's D-line. I think it's something that could help with Auburn's lack of ability on the offensive line and maybe keep them in the game. Ultimately, I lean towards a loss. Georgia is an L. Bye week, you go at LSU. LSU's too good. I really think they lose to LSU. I don't think it's a good matchup for them on all levels. And then you have Ole Miss. Probable, but I'm kind of leaning to a loss there, but you never know. I like Ole Miss. I think they're a quality team. You get Mississippi State at home. I think Mississippi State's another little wild card team now that we're out of the Mike Leach era. RIP and more under Zach Garnett now. So we'll see how that looks. But that could be a tricky one as well. Then you go at Vandy, which they should win, but have as a probable lean win. At Arkansas, probable lean loss. New Mexico, W. Alabama, probable. Because we know how they play against Alabama. All in all, guys, I think it's more likely that they go 6-6 than 8-4. I'm going under for sure.
All right. Well, we got 2 unders at 7 wins even on Auburn from Gonzo and Xan. So I'll be the odd man out here. I'm sending it. Give me an over. 7 wins for Auburn. I mean, for me, I think we all agree the offense is going to improve. Like that's basically like the closest thing you can get to a guarantee, if anything, in college football is that this offense is going to improve with Freeze. How much improvement will we see from Robbie Ashford? I know Peyton Thorne's also in the mix. I personally think it'll be Robbie Ashford as the quarterback. I think there's another level to unlock there with Robbie Ashford, but we shall see. Can Freeze tap into that? I mean, as far as the schedule, I think the schedule is pretty favorable for an Auburn schedule. I'll preface that. For an Auburn schedule, it is favorable. I mean, you got UMass at Cal, Stanford, and then New Mexico State as your non-con. I mean, you got to go at Cal. I mean, I think the only thing they have to worry about is making sure they don't misgender somebody or use wrong pronouns when they go to Cal. But other than that, I think that's a win. And then as far as the SEC schedule, their East crossover this year is Vandy. They draw Vandy as their rotational opponent. I mean, that's pretty favorable. You got Ole Miss, toss-up at home. Mississippi State, toss-up at home. And then, of course, the Iron Bowl. That's at home at Jordan-Hare against Alabama, who we think is kind of vulnerable this year. I'm sending it, boys. Give me an over on Auburn. My numbers project 7.2, so I think 7 is probably the most likely outcome here, but give me some Hugh Freeze. Give me some landline phone calls. Give me all of it. Give me all of it. Give me some really weird DMs. Give me an Iron Bowl victory. Study. Give me some Bible study. Give me all of it.
If they beat Alabama, I think the over is in play. That's what's going to decide it, I think.
And Hugh's got to be the only coach who figured out Saban. I mean, he did beat him twice, so that is worth something.
I wonder how many Auburn fans are going to make that trip to go play Cal. That'll be an interesting culture clash there.
Yeah, all their fans are going to get canceled in the stands. You have a tiger for a mascot? That's inhumane.
All right. Well, so I'm contrarian here with Auburn, but we shall see. I think very valid concerns from you guys too as well on Auburn. I mean, this is definitely, like we said, this is a wild card team. They really are. They could be as high as third best in the West. They could be as low as one of the worst in the West. So we shall see. How about another team that's sort of a wild card team, but maybe they're a team that can have a bounce back season? Arkansas, the Hogs, 7-6 last year, which, believe it or not, was kind of like a minor disappointment compared to what expectations were for Arkansas fans last year. That just shows you how good of a job Sam Pittman's done at turning around that program. Because, Arkansas was pretty bad for an awful long time there, but Sam Pittman's just done such a great job. This is his 4th season in Fayetteville now, and they have a win total of 7 wins even. Xan, lead us off on the Razorbacks.
Razorbacks, 23rd in offensive efficiency last year. Very good offense. 54th in defensive efficiency. Respectable defense. 26th in line yards, 103rd in sack rate, but I don't think that's truly indicative of their offensive line because they have a mobile quarterback. They have a very good offensive line, guys. Very good. A top 30 offensive line. Sam Pittman, you hit the nail on the head. I love what he's done with this program. They bring in Dan Enos from Maryland to replace Kendall Briles. I like that hire. I think there's a lot of potential there. And they bring in Travis Williams from UCF to be the new DC. I like that hire as well. KJ Jefferson returns, and that is the big one here. Dual threat, 2,600 passing yards, 24 touchdowns, 5 picks. And then they've got Jacoby Criswell to be the backup. So there's at least a little bit of depth at the quarterback position. They return Raheem Sanders, who's an absolute bona fide beast, 1,400 yards, 10 touchdowns, 6.5 yards per carry. Look at the wide receivers. This is where it gets a little interesting because they brought in a lot of lower level guys to play wide receiver. They bring in Isaac Tesla from Hillsdale College, 1,300 yards and 13 touchdowns at Hillsdale College. They bring in Andrew Armstrong from A&M Converse, another 1,000-yard guy, 13 touchdowns. And then they have wide receiver Isaiah Satenga, who's a 94 grade guy who's a redshirt freshman. So we'll see how they progress there. I do like the potential at that position. They do lose Keytron Jackson, Baylor, but ultimately I kind of like what they have at wide receiver. I think there's definitely something to be had there. Another thing I really like are their tight ends. They added Varkey's Gums from North Texas, about 500-yard guy. He's a receiving guy, 5 touchdowns. And they have got Luke Haas, who's a true freshman, who I think could be very impactful for the Razorbacks. He's out of Oklahoma. And basically everybody and their mama wanted to get him, and the Razorbacks got him. So that is another really good addition. I think they're going to be firing all cylinders. Over here to the offensive line, they do lose an elite center in Ricky Stromberg to the NFL. They lose their tackle, Dalton Wagner, who's another very good player. But they retain a good portion of their interior linemen in Bo Limmer and Brady Latham. They bring in Joshua Braun from Florida. Their offensive line is probably going to take a slight step back this season, but I still expect it to be very, very solid. They're very well coached. I think it's going to be a decent unit for sure, more than respectable. Turn our head over to the defense. They return Dwight McGlothern, who's a very good player at cornerback. They bring in Al Walcott from Baylor, very good player to play corner, probably going to play nickel for him. They have Jaheim Singletary, who was a 96th grade guy out of high school coming in from UGA, young guy. There's a lot of potential at that corner position. You bring in Lorando Johnson from Baylor. He's going to replace Jalen Catalon, who he lost to Texas. Then you have Hudson Clark, who returns as well, who also grades pretty well in coverage. I got to say, they've got a solid secondary. They've got a solid secondary unit, Arkansas, in addition to having a good offense. This looks really good so far, guys. This looks really good. Let's look at the linebackers. You lose Drew Sanders and Bumper Pool. That's going to hurt a little bit. Bumper Pool, I felt like was there for 18 years, but he's gone now. You return Chris Paul, not the point guard, but Chris Paul, the linebacker. And then you bring in Jaheim Thomas from Cincinnati, who graded well on PFF. You bring in Antonio Greer from USF, who was their best linebacker. And then you return Jordan Crook, who was highly rated out of high school for depth. They've got a pretty deep linebacking group. I still like what they have at that position. Pretty staunch. Defensive line, guys. Pretty decent defensive line. They return Campbell, pretty good in run defense. Anthony Booker, bringing Anthony Booker, a 4-star from Maryland. And most of their projected guys on the edge, though, and this is where I get a little concerned, don't grade very well in pass rush, don't grade very well in run stopping. And I think that's where their weakness is. I think the defensive line is the worst unit on this entire team. But we will see. There is so much to be liked about the rest of this team as a whole that I honestly really like the Arkansas Razorbacks. But just because a team is expected to be better doesn't always mean that you go over on a team's win total. The schedule matters. Let's dive into the schedule. Western Carolina, win. Kent State, win. BYU, win. At LSU, probable but lean loss. Texas A&M at a neutral site. They're playing in Arlington. I think they can win that game, but I have it as a probable. At Ole Miss as a probable. At Bama, probable lean loss. Mississippi State, I have a probable. They're at home, but lean win. Bye week at Florida, a bye week to prepare for Florida. I think they win that game. Auburn, I lean towards a win. I have it as a probable. They're at home. I think they can handle them. Then they get FIU. That's a win. And then you get a probable against Mizzou. I do like Mizzou. We talked about that on the SEC East pod, but that's a probable as well, and they are at home. Guys, I think minimally, I find it very hard to think that Arkansas will go 6-6. I think 7-5 is kind of on the dot for them, and I could even see the potential for 8-4. So I think right on 7 is where I want to be, but it's more likely that they're going to get 8 than they're going to get 6. I'm going over on the Razorbacks.
My assessment on this team, I'm not quite as high on them as you guys are. Well, I guess I wouldn't say that. I feel like we're pretty much in agreement here on Arkansas. My numbers have them projected at 7.0 wins. So, like, literally right on the dot of the win total. I think this is pegged pretty evenly. I wouldn't play this either way if I was actually trying to bet on it. The schedule is relatively favorable, again, for an SEC West schedule. Non-conference play, you got Western Carolina, Kent State, who just got absolutely gutted. Like, Kent State got the entire toilet flushed down on them. Their entire team just left. So that should be 2 blowout wins. BYU, I mean, we saw what Arkansas did when they went up to Provo last year and ran it down BYU's throat. Didn't even have to throw the ball and could drop 50 points. So they got them coming at home this year. I would expect that to be a win. And then FIU, one of literally the worst teams in all of FBS last year, as your non-conference slate, likely 5-0 or 4-0, I should say. And then the SEC draw, their East crossover this year. They got to go at Florida coming off a bye. And then Missouri, of course, is their annual rival. So those are pretty winnable games. They didn't draw Georgia. They didn't draw Tennessee, none of those teams. So when you look at this schedule here, it's looking pretty favorable. I mean, the biggest problem for me, and this is why I went under on Arkansas last year. I made some money betting the under Arkansas at 7.5 last year. And it was primarily because KJ Jefferson is such a good player, but he's literally just like means everything to this offense. If he gets hurt, we saw what happens if he got hurt last year. Didn't look so well in a couple of games last year. Jacoby Criswell is the projected backup. I don't know if there's really much to expect there with Jacoby Criswell. I mean, very limited experience at North Carolina. I mean, it's literally, my numbers have 7 on the dot projected, so this is literally a toss-up. I'm going to have to lean under here just because of KJ Jefferson injury concerns. But, I mean, I don't want to have to do that. I want to have to say under because of injury possibility, but that's just kind of how I feel with this team. KJ Jefferson is so good. He just means a whole lot to this offense. You guys know he was tied for Hendon Hooker in terms of the best graded SEC quarterback last year. Pretty good. Like, KJ Jefferson's a great player. I think Dan Enos too, good offensive coordinator replacing Kendall Briles. So you have a good OC replacing good OC. Apparently they're still going to run the veer and shoot, which I imagine they will. So that being said, I don't know. This is really a toss-up. If you're an Arkansas fan, like, don't come at me here. I see 7 wins as most likely, but I'm just gonna slight edge to the under.
This is a hard one with that number. Something about 7, because 7 is saying, okay, you can make a bowl game, but you still hit the under, or you could have a better than not season be 8-4. It is just, I hate the number personally. So for me, it's going to come down to the fact of, can Arkansas get 4 SEC wins? When I look at the schedule, I think, yes, they can. I am on the over. like at an 8-4, most likely. But I think Mississippi State is a team they can clip. I think they can get the Gators in a swamp off a bye week. Auburn, who knows what November Auburn could look like just as a first year team. And it's at home. That's winnable. A&M, like I alluded to with the A&M segment, very beatable in Dallas. And at Ole Miss, it's tough because it's a road game, but like Ole Miss, they're one of those teams, just depending on the day, you maybe clip them. And of course, to end the year, Missouri, even though I am high on Missouri, the game's at home, and just depending where both teams are at in the season, that is more likely one Arkansas could win, again, being at home. So an 8-4, would I put money on this? Absolutely not. But I'm with Xan that I think that KJ Jefferson, and you as well, Shoob, KJ Jefferson is the key here. If he's healthy, the sky's the limit. And if something were to happen to him, that could bode some problems for the Razorbacks.
Yeah, if you could tell me right now, like we're recording this in July, if you told me one thing about this season, you said KJ Jefferson will play all 12 games in the regular season. Like if you told me that for a fact will happen, I'd probably go over here, but we shall see. If you're on the over, probably going to have to expect Arkansas to rack up a lot of those wins at the back end of that schedule. Because after the Alabama game, I mean, those are all very winnable games for Arkansas. So we shall see if the Hogs can bounce back with another good season. Now it's time to wrap it up. The final Power 5 team for us to cover, gentlemen. It has been a long ride, but we are here to close it out with Mississippi State, and I will do the honors. The Bulldogs, man, I was high on this team last year. I bet the over at 5.5, which was just absolute highway robbery. They were 9-4 last year, gentlemen. They were very quietly a good team last year. Very solid team that just kind of gets buried down in this division. So not a lot of people realize how good Mississippi State was last year, but they were very solid. Of course, Zach Arnett, he is the new head man there. He was promoted from defensive coordinator after the passing of the late Mike Leach. Rest in peace. But it is Zach Arnett's first season as a head coach. We shall see how he does at Mississippi State. I mean, no bigger of a grand stage to start your head coaching career than in the SEC, in my opinion. His defense was pretty dang good last year, too. So we shall see how that pans out. But let's start with the offense here first. Last year, 37th overall in offensive efficiency. A lot of their guys from last year are returning, but they have a new offensive coordinator, Kevin Barbay from Appalachian State. He was the OC there for the Mountaineers. Apparently, they're still going to run the air raid system, but Barbay is going to be introducing some new concepts. So we shall see how that goes. It seems like it'll be an air raid scheme with a little bit of traditional twist to it, if you want to put it that way. Will Rogers returns at quarterback. This is his 4th year starting. Will Rogers, he's a solid veteran now. 35 games of starting experience under his belt. So a lot of games here, a lot of experience with Rogers. They have a new backup quarterback, Mike Wright, who transferred over from Vanderbilt. I like Mike Wright a lot. Big fan of him. So I like the depth there at quarterback. Running back, Joquavius Marks returns. Good returning piece. However, did not help that they lost Dylan Johnson, who left for Washington. So good running back returning. A better running back, in my opinion, who left for Washington. But I think Joquavius Marks is going to be happy about a little bit more traditional running back usage with the new OC. And then the wide receiver room, they return all their pass catchers last year that they have coming back this year. They all have experience. I mean, let's face it. I mean, in this air raid system, if you were the 6th best receiver on this depth chart, there's a good chance you had like 30 receptions. And that goes to show for a lot of these guys. Not really any standouts, I would say, on this receiving core. They got a new tight end, Jorquavius Spivey from TCU. Hell of a name there for Spivey. And then the offensive line. It was functionally good last year. Top 30 in all line metrics. A lot of snap experience coming back with a little bit of positional shuffling on the deck there in the offensive line. Most of those guys, they were marginally above replacement level grades, but could there be a learning curve with the new scheme concepts? It's a little bit of a question for me. We shall see. And then the defense. Defense was pretty dang good last year. 14th overall in defensive efficiency. But the bad news, only 43% of that defensive production is returning this year. They lost a lot of guys off that defense. Defensive line, it was good last year. Of course it was. They were top 15 overall in the country. 32nd in average line yards. Slightly above average sack rates. they do have some decent snap experience returning. Linebacker room, decent room with, again, there is some snap experience returning. So yeah, they lost a lot of production, but at least a lot of the guys that they have coming back this year got a good bit of playing time last year. And then the secondary, the big loss here is Emmanuel Forbes at corner. Of course, he was a first round draft pick. He was the number 1 graded defensive back in the entire SEC. So losing Forbes is a big loss. Overall, the room I still think will be all right, but of course it's going to drop off with just the caliber of player that Forbes is. So when we're looking at this team holistically here, I still think there's going to be, I don't know, it's kind of tough to peg Mississippi State down because the new OC says he wants to introduce a little bit more different concepts, but yet still run the air raid. I don't know how that's going to look. I think there is a little bit of downside potential here just because of all these guys learning a slightly new system. I could be wrong, though. It really is a wild card. I could be wrong about this. I'm just speculating. And then the defense, I don't think the drop-off will be terrible, but, how will Arnett, being the head coach now instead of the DC, how will that affect the defense? Is Arnett still going to be calling the plays? Is his focus going to be on the defense? Like, I don't know how that's going to work. A lot of moving parts here with Mississippi State. I would probably think they drop outside the top 20, but that's just, again, speculation. And then the schedule. When it boils down to here is the schedule. Favorable non-conference slate. You got Southeast Louisiana, who apparently a lot of these SEC schools liked a lot of those guys from that school because there's a handful of transfers that came from Southeastern Louisiana. Then they draw Arizona at home this year. They beat Arizona pretty soundly last year. I would expect the same this year. And then they also have Southern Miss, respectable G5 opponent, but that's at home. That should be a win. And then Western Michigan, who also had a lot of players go to other Power 5 schools. So should be 4-0 in the non-con, should expect 4 wins there. But then the rest of the schedule, your East draw, you draw South Carolina away, and then you have Kentucky at home, which is pretty favorable for SEC East draw. I don't like their away splits, though, for the rest of the SEC West. You got to go at Arkansas, at Auburn, at Texas A&M. Those are all sort of toss-up games. A lot of those are away, so not necessarily favorable. But at the end of the day, my numbers project 6.6 wins. 6.6. So I am 1/10 of a shade to the over according to my numbers. But will I follow my numbers? No. I'm going to go lean under here. I think 6 wins is the most likely outcome. I don't know. I just think it's a tough situation. I don't know how, when you have a new head coach with no prior experience, you have a lot of deck shuffling on the coaching staff, new OC that wants to try to introduce new concepts. I touched on that plenty of times already. I don't know. It just seems like a little bit of regression here for Mississippi State, but I would like to see them maintain a high level of play, especially after Mike Leach is gone. I think it is possible, but I'm going to go lean under here. I think 6 wins is most likely.
Dude, you hit the nail on the head, my friend. There's a lot I like and a lot that concerns me with the Bulldogs. I like that Chad Memphis came in from Utah to be a wide receivers coach. I thought that was a great addition as Steve Spurrier Jr. and Drew Hollingshead went on to greener pastures. The defensive coordinator will be Matt Brock, the linebacker coach. He's been elevated, but as you alluded to, I mean, what does that mean? Who is actually calling the plays? Who do I look to if I'm getting the defensive call in the fourth quarter of a close game? I'll say that when Arnett was elevated, I understand the reasoning for it, but from a holistic perspective, I would be surprised if he's the long-term coach for the Bulldogs. And again, the situation was horrific. Always prayers up to Mike Leach's families. That was just terrible. And that was the right move, elevating Arnett. I just don't know if it'll be a long-term payoff. But again, let me come back to the present day. With this schedule, the non-con, that's a 4-0 for the most part, unless Arizona pulls something out of a hat. I think you're 4-0. So now can you get 3 SEC wins? And I don't have any bona fide SEC win pegged here. Maybe at South Carolina, and then maybe because you have Kentucky at home, and then Ole Miss being the Egg Bowl, maybe you could clip the Rebels then. But like you said, those away splits with Arky and Auburn and A&M, I don't like that. And I overall just don't like the scheme change. I think if Leach was still here, this is over 8-4 all day. But given the change in leadership, change in scheme, and the schedule dynamics, I'm under on the Bulldogs. They could still make a bowl game, absolutely, but I just don't see a 7-5 this year.
I like the depth they have at the quarterback position. Will Rogers, Mike Wright. Yes, I know it's not a Mike Leach offense, but you still have a lot of experience at the position. Really enjoy that. Really like that. They were 37th in offensive efficiency last year. I think they'll at least stay in the top 50, which keeps you competitive. And then you keep Zach Arnett. He's your defensive guy. They had the 13th most efficient defense last year. This is while being in the SEC. They're going to have minimally a top 20 defense this year. They're going to be a pretty quality team all around. I have them agreed 4-0 non-con. They go at South Carolina in week 3 of the season. I think that's a winnable game. You mentioned that their draws from the other side are South Carolina, Kentucky. I think there's potential to go at minimally 1-1 there. Well, let's just say this. Anywhere from 0-2 to 2-0. It doesn't surprise me. They could win both those games. Ole Miss, the Egg Bowl, is one that they could win as well. That one is at home. Texas A&M, we mentioned we don't really know what to expect with Texas A&M. It is at A&M. And at Auburn. I'm a little bit higher on this team, guys, than some of the people they're playing. I do know that they have some tough away splits. But ultimately, I like this team overall. I think they're well balanced on both sides of the ball. And balance usually spells success. I think of teams like Utah. I think of, because I think of all that. Balance usually spells success. And for that reason, I'm going 7 wins on the over Mississippi State.
There it is. We got an over on the Bulldogs at 6.5 from Xan. Me and Gonzo on the under to a shade. Yeah, I could see it for sure. Let's keep in mind here, Zach Arnett, he did coach the ReliaQuest Bowl, I believe, against Illinois last year. They beat Illinois in the bowl game with Arnett as the coach. And Illinois was a pretty good team last year. So that should be a positive sign if you're a Bulldogs fan. So we shall see. But, first year head coach, it's definitely a big wild card. But there are some pieces. This team was 14th overall in the country last year in overall efficiency. It was a good team. It was a good team that flew under the radar because they played a tough schedule and, they won 9 games in a tough division. So, yeah, there's not like the cupboards bare here for Mississippi State. Well, gentlemen, we have completed win totals for the Power 5. Tip of the cap to ourselves. I'm proud of us. There's a lot of work. For those of you who are listening, who have been following along, we appreciate you. If you watch multiple of our videos / podcasts, and you followed along for all these teams, salute to you. We appreciate you for listening and tuning in. We try to provide the best informative information we possibly can. And we put a lot of work into this, definitely a lot of time. Our free time goes into this, so we appreciate it. Leave a like on this video. If you enjoyed this, leave a comment, of course. We always say it. If you're a fan of one of these teams, man, hit us up. Let us know what you think. Just be a little respectful. Just try to be a little respectful. You can be a little disrespectful, but just give a little ounce of respect, because we'll definitely reply to you. So anyways, let us know what you think, what you agree on, what you disagree on. And with that being said, the Saturday Scholars, for Xan, Gonzo, and Shoob, signing out. See y'all later. Have a great day.